All right, let's talk about a scary progression in jazz piano right here. So now if you've ever played a progression like this, you know it could be scary to have that one chord hold out for all those measures, right? So, right, even if you get some jazzier chords, all that space, you want to fill that space. I'm going to show you in 5 steps how to get it to this. Right? So let's get started. First thing, here's our original progression. So you can see that what we're doing here is we get the C major chord, that's our 1 chord. Then we go to D minor, which is our 2 minor. And then G7, which is our 5-7 chord. All right, so pretty simple, 1 chord for 2 measures and then a 2-5. So now the question always is, all right, so now what do I do in here to fill that in? So the first step is this. We could add in a diatonic chord. So remember our diatonic chords, if we play 7th chords built on each note of the major scale, we get our diatonic 7th chords. So 1 major, 2 minor, 3 minor, 4 major 7th, 5 dominant, 6 minor, 7 minor, 7 flat, 5. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to bring in our 6 minor chord. Hey, how do I know to bring in my 6 minor chord? Well, if you kind of follow around in the circle of fifths, you'll notice that, hey, look, A comes right before D, and D comes right before G when you're taking a look at the circle of fifths. Now, if you take a look at this progression, you see that we start with C, and then we go to A minor, then D minor, then G7. So the A minor, you might wonder, well, why A minor? Well, if we take a look at our circle of fifths, you'll notice that if we work backwards from C, counterclockwise in the circle of fifths, you see that we go from C to G to D to A. So notice how that A will resolve us nicely to D, D will resolve us to G, G will resolve us to C. Now you don't need to use the circle of fifths. You could just know that, okay, look, if I'm trying to get to any note, go down to perfect fourth, that's my dominant motion to get back to that note. So that means a G7 chord is going to lead me to C. Well, if I want to go from get to G, well, what can I do? You don't go down to perfect fourth or count down 5 half steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all right? So if I did a D, I could do D7 to G to C, or I could do D minor to G7 to C. And I can keep going on with that. That's a little bit larger of a lesson to get into, right? So this is the first progression, first way in which we can change so that we can add at least 1 chord in here to get some motion. This is what that sounds like. Oops. This is what that sounds like. This is what that sounds like. Now, we could end right there, and that sounds pretty darn good, right? That A minor adds some nice, nice motion to the mix. But let's keep going. So now what if we were to do an A7 chord? Why an A7 chord? Because remember, that's our dominant motion, right? So that's our dominant chord. The A7 chord would be called our 5-7 of 2 chord. Basically, that's a fancy way of saying it's the dominant chord that's going to take us to the 2 minor chord. Don't forget, D minor is our 2 minor chord, right? So if we want to find that dominant chord, again, just count down 5 half steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, A. So if I create an A dominant 7th chord, that will resolve me to D minor. Okay? So now, let's try playing that A7 chord along with the melody and see how it sounds. Not bad. So here was A minor again. And here's A7. Now the A7 is nice because it adds just a little bit of bite to it, right? Adds a little bit of bite because that C sharp in there kind of takes it outside of the key of C. All right, so that's step 2. Step 3, we can now do something called preceding the dominant chord with its related 2 chord. So this E minor chord right in here is what we call our related 2 minor chord. This chord is going to take us from E minor and take us right to A7. Again, if we take a look at where's that coming from? A, count down 5 half steps. See a pattern here? right? So E, I can make an E minor chord to take me to A7, to take me to D minor, to take me to G, to take me to C, right? You notice this descending pattern here utilizing the circle of fourths, circle of fifths, okay? All right, so now let's hear what that sounds like. Not bad. Now the A7, I don't really love the A7. And if we look at why we don't love that A7, right? No matter how I try and voice this, what is that? That's a major seventh. And if I'm playing the dominant seventh down there, it sounds a little bit rough, doesn't it? So maybe the A7 there isn't going to be the best choice. Even though sometimes we can kind of get away with that tension. Especially in the heat of the moment, you could get away with it. But since we're taking a little bit of time here to explore, let's see what else we can come up with. What if we did this? Now I change the A7 chord into an E flat minor chord. Notice that descending motion. E minor, E flat minor, down to D minor. So E minor, E flat minor, down to D minor. Right? See that descending motion? Well, what does it sound like? Oh, yeah. That's gorgeous. I love that sound. Now, why would I think to go to E flat minor? Well, once again, it's that note right here, right? That G sharp. So now, how is G sharp working on the A7 chord? Well, again, I said that would be a major seventh, but it's a dominant seventh chord, right? Not real great. Now, you might think, hey, what if I played A major seventh? Hey, let's try it. No, A major seventh doesn't sound good. Why? Because it doesn't have any motion. Dominant chords have motion. Major seventh chords kind of give you like a let's stay put kind of feel. All right, so so the A7 works, but that G sharp in there sounds kind of tight, right? Because that's a little bit tense because that's the major seventh. So instead, I know that the G sharp, which is really an A flat, is going to work perfectly over E flat. Why? Because that's going to be my 11th. I can get some really kind of cool voicings there. I could spread that out if I wanted to. Add the 9th in there. That's a real gorgeous voicing right there. But let's not get too far in the weeds with our voicings. So the E flat minor gives that nice descending motion from E down to E flat to D minor. Right? All right, so now what if we ramp it up even one more step? Now we could stop here, and this sounds absolutely gorgeous right here, but let's ramp it up one more step. Now what I did is I added a tritone substitution in front of the E minor. Again, if we take E, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? That would be a B7 chord. So I could do like a B7 chord maybe there, right? So right here I could maybe replace that F7 with a B7. Yeah, but it's not going to sound great, especially with that C hanging over, right? So instead of playing the B7, I can go and play my tritone substitution. The tritone substitution is just the note that is a tritone away from the root, okay? And all I'm doing is I'm going from B, and I'm going up to the tritone, which is F, and I'm creating a dominant seventh chord there as well. All right, so let's pause for a second, just talk real quick that tritone substitution, because that kind of confuses students sometimes. Now, you got to understand dominant motion, right? So you got to know, how do I get to a target chord? That's my dominant seventh chord, right? And we talked about that just real quickly. Remember, this is a quick tip, so I'm not going into too much detail. There's a bunch of detail on the site, and I'll do some more mini lessons on it. Anyway, if I want to get to C, I know 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, go down 5 half steps, make a dominant seventh chord, G7 is going to take me to C. And I could keep that pattern going on. I could go D7 to G7 to C. I could go A7 to D7 to G7 to C. I could go E7 to A7 to D7 to G7 to C. I could keep that pattern going on and on and on and on. We call that our extended dominance, right? Where we're moving dominant motion after dominant motion. Okay, so the dominant chord, fine, we understand that. The dominant chord is going to resolve us, up a fourth, right, or down a fifth, however you want to look at it, to our target chord. All right, so now I said I could go to B7 here, and it's not terrible. You know, I mean, I could do it, but the C with the B, right, creates that flat 9 interval. It's a little bit tense. So I said, let me do a tritone substitution there instead. So now, one easy way of finding the tritone is start with your octave, right? So I'm trying to find the tritone of B7. So start with my B octave, and then just keep moving down until you get to the very middle note of the octave, okay? Another easy way of doing it is go up to the fifth and then flat that. Okay, but I'm going to show you an even easier way. Forget thinking B, forget thinking tritone and all of that. Just simply say, hey, look, I got some free space in here, right? So when I was over here, I got some free space in here, and I know I'm going to go to my E minor chord. Simply go up a half step and make a dominant 7th chord and then resolve it down a half step. Way easier to think of it that way than think about all the tritone substitution and all that stuff. Now you get this sound. That is pro progression right there. That is a gorgeous sounding progression. Now here on that F7 chord, it's really, the melody is functioning as my sharp 11, real kind of cool tension. E minor, E flat minor, D minor. Can add maybe a sharp 11 in there, 2 in the G7, right? But that progression now sounds really, really nice, all right? So again, just to review real quickly, what we did, we started with our basic progression. All that space in the beginning, kind of scary, especially if the tempo moves a little bit slower. Let's say we want to do this as a ballad and not a swing. Whew, there's a lot of space going on in there. But as we move through this, listen what happens when I play even at that tempo with the more advanced arrangement. I mean, I could really get some nice chords there and some nice motion because I'm filling in those chords and filling in that progression. So what we did first, started with our 6 minor. Now, that's not always going to be the case. You might have to find other chords that are going to work, but in this particular case, that 6 minor is going to sound nice. Then we said, well, what if we change that 6 minor to a 5/7 of 2 chord? That's what we call our secondary dominance. Secondary dominance, got a whole bunch of lessons back at Jazzedge Academy on that. Then what I did is I pushed that dominant 7th chord over and then preceded it with its related 2 chord. Got a bunch of lessons on that as well. All right, so that's the related 2 going to the secondary dominant, then resolving on from there. Then we said, the secondary dominant, the A7 doesn't sound all that great because it doesn't really work that great with the melody. So let's change instead half step resolution down with a minor chord, right? So we're getting that minor to the minor to the minor, a nice half step motion down. And this is also what we can call constant motion, right? So it's a constant chord motion, right? Minor to minor to minor, down in half steps, right? And then from there, step 5 is, hey, let's add in that F7 chord, right, which is our tritone substitution. And we know an easy way of getting to that tritone substitution is simply say, hey, look, we got this space right in here. Let's fill it with a chord. So then what we're going to do is let's just go up a half step and play an F dominant 7th chord and resolve it down to E minor, all right? So not overly complicated, but I realize if you're brand new to this, it gets a little bit complicated and a little bit tough. If you want more help on this, I have my practical music theory and reharmonization class that I do over at Jazzedge Academy. We've got a whole bunch of other lessons. I hope that you'll join me. But anyway, thank you very much for joining me in this quick tip. Be sure to download the music. The link is right below in the description. Let me know, leave your comments. If you don't mind, like the video. I would appreciate that. Let me know what quick tips you would like to see by leaving them in the comments, and I'll see you in the next quick tip.